Peshawar, Pakistan. The edge of the Khyber Pass. November 1985. The air is thick with diesel fumes and dust. A battered Toyota Hilux, its paint scoured by desert sand, idles in the shadow of a mud brick compound. Inside the vehicle, two men wait. They are not soldiers. Their clothing is civilian, but their posture is rigid, their eyes constantly scanning the labyrinth of alleyways. A third figure emerges from a metal doorway. He is taller, dressed in the traditional shalwar kameez of the Afghan frontier, but his beard is neatly trimmed, his gaze analytical. This is a man who operates in the space between worlds. He carries a burlap sack heavy with a single object. Without a word, he approaches the Toyota. The passenger window slides down. No greetings are exchanged. The sack is passed through the window. Inside, the men glimpse not opium or gems, but a cylinder of dull olive-green metal, scorched black at one end. It is a rocket motor, approximately 1 meter in length, its surface stamped with Cyrillic characters and a faded red star. The man from the compound speaks a single coded phrase in Pashto, referencing a prearranged drop point for payment. The window rolls up, the Toyota slips into the chaotic traffic, disappearing toward the airport road. In the back seat, the rocket motor rests against the duffel bags. It is inert, a piece of battlefield debris. But to the analysts waiting across an ocean, it is a treasure of incalculable value. This scarred piece of Soviet engineering holds a secret locked inside its cured propellant grain, a formula that could tilt the balance of the Cold War. Its journey from a shattered hillside in Afghanistan to this clandestine handover has just set in motion one of the CIA's most audacious and consequential technical intelligence operations. The theft of a superpower's crown jewels begins not with a spy in a trench coat, but in the chaos of a guerrilla war. To understand the value of that stolen cylinder, one must first step back from the mountains of Afghanistan and into the grand, terrifying chessboard of the Cold War. The ultimate measure of power between the United States and the Soviet Union was not counted in tanks or fighter jets, but in minutes. The time between a launch order and an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, reaching its target. By the late 70s, the core of both nations' nuclear deterrents resided in vast hardened silos buried beneath the plains of the American Midwest and the Siberian steppe. But the missiles inside them were fundamentally different. S land-based fleet used solid rocket fuel. The Soviet counterpart, the mighty SS-18 Satan, the largest ICBM ever built, relied on liquid propellants. The distinction is not trivial, it is a matter of survival. Liquid-fueled missiles are powerful but profoundly vulnerable. Their fuels, often hypergolic, igniting on contact, are highly toxic and corrosive. They cannot be stored inside the missile for long periods. A launch sequence is a complex hours-long ballet of pumping these volatile liquids from separate storage tanks into the missile's empty stages. The silo becomes a hive of activity, a glaring signature to satellite surveillance. It is a window of maximum exposure. A solid-fueled missile is a weapon in a state of constant readiness. Its propellant, a rubbery, dense compound of fuel, oxidizer and binder, is cast and cured inside the motor casing itself. It is stable. It can sit for years. A launch command triggers an ignition sequence measured in seconds. The silo lid blows, and the missile is on its way before an enemy warhead has time to arrive. It is a secure second strike capability embodied in chemistry. Intelligence believed American solid fuel technology was superior. This confidence underpinned the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. But in the early 80s, a disturbing pattern emerged from technical intelligence, satellite imagery, and whispered defector reports. The Soviets were closing the gap with terrifying speed. Their new generation of mobile, road-launched tactical missiles like the OTR-21 Tochka, known to NATO as the SS-21 Scarab, demonstrated performance parameters that shouldn't have been possible with their older solid formulas. Their burn times were longer. Their specific impulse, the measure of a propellant's efficiency, was higher. Their new SLBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, showed similar advances. The implication was seismic. If the Soviets could master such advanced solid fuels for small missiles, scaling the technology to the ICBM level was only a matter of time and engineering. A Soviet solid-fueled ICBM would shatter the delicate stability of the nuclear balance. It would mean a force as responsive as the Minutemen, but with the colossal throw weight of the Soviet design bureaus. America's window of warning would evaporate. The CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology began tasking every asset, every source to find the proof. They gave this suspected Soviet breakthrough a code name, Lapot. The quest for Lapot became an obsession, but the Soviet military-industrial complex, the Voyeno-Promyshlenny complex, was a fortress. Its research institutes, like the secretive NPO Soyuz, were cities within cities, shielded by layers of state security, the KGB, and paranoia. Penetrating them directly was deemed nearly impossible. The CIA needed a back door. They found it in a war 2,000 miles away. The narrative now shifts from the global nuclear standoff to the brutal ground-level conflict that would provide the key. While the scientists at NPO Soyuz worked in sterile secrecy, the product of their labour was being heard into the mountains of Afghanistan. The Soviet Union's Tsartanine invasion to prop up the Communist Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, DRA, had metastasized into a grinding, decade-long counterinsurgency. For the Soviet Fourth Army, this meant adapting a military machine built for continental warfare against NATO to fight a dispersed, elusive enemy, the Mujahideen. This adaptation required firepower, lots of it, and it had to be mobile, responsive, and simple. The Soviet answer was an avalanche of rockets and missiles. Helicopters like the Mi-24 Hind unleashed salvos of 57mm S-5 rockets. Infantry fighting vehicles fired anti-tank guided missiles. Most significantly, entire brigades were equipped with mobile ballistic systems. The OTR-21 Tochka, the very system that had piqued CIA interest, was deployed. This solid-fueled, road-mobile tactical missile could deliver a 500-kilogram warhead, conventional, chemical, or nuclear, with startling accuracy out to 70 kilometers. For Soviet commanders, it was a scalpel to hit Mujahideen strongholds, supply depots and command centers deep in the Hindu Kush. They fired them routinely, but war is a chaotic exporter of technology. A Hind could be shot down with a stinger, a BMP could be immobilized by a mine, and a Tochka missile battery, lumbering through a narrow valley, was vulnerable to ambush. The Mujahideen, increasingly funded and armed by the CIA through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, were not just guerrilla fighters, they were becoming skilled salvage crews. The CIA's covert aid program, Operation Cyclone, had a mandate far beyond supplying weapons. Issued from Langley, a priority tasking circulated to case officers in Islamabad and Peshawar. Acquire Soviet hardware. Every piece was valuable. A new model of tank sight could reveal optical advancements. A shattered radio could yield circuit board secrets. But the Holy Grail, filtered down through classified channels, was anything related to rockets and missiles. Propellant samples, guidance units, casing fragments. The ISI acted as the essential middleman. They controlled access to the Mujahideen groups and ran the logistics pipelines. They understood the value of this scrap metal. A marketplace of shadows emerged. Mujahideen commanders learned that a strange scorched tube they pulled from a wrecked launch vehicle could be worth more than a truckload of captured Kalashnikovs. They didn't need to know why. The Americans would pay in cash, weapons, or political favor. The system was imperfect but prolific. Captured Soviet materiel flowed across the Durand Line into Pakistan. It was gathered in warehouses in Peshawar and Quetta, where CIA technical officers, often disguised as contractors or diplomats, conducted initial triage. Most items were catalogued and shipped for broader analysis, but in late 1985 one item stood out. It was a rocket motor, relatively intact, from a Soviet 9M114 Sturm anti-tank missile system. Its external markings were standard, but its end-burn propellant grain, visible where the warhead had sheared off, had a peculiar deep-cured texture and colour. It didn't match the known fingerprint of standard Soviet solid fuels. A sample was carefully cut, sealed in a sterile container, and placed on the next flight out. When the analysis landed at the CIA's Office of Scientific and Weapons Research, it caused a quiet sensation. Preliminary spectrometry hinted at a complex high-energy binder system, a polybutadiene composite with novel additives. This was not the old formula. This was something new. It was a fragment, a clue. The CIA needed more. They needed a textbook, not a single page. They needed a complete functional motor from a more strategically significant system. The order went back to the field, find a Tochka. The stage was now set. The obsession of nuclear strategists met the opportunism of a bloody guerrilla war. In the Hindu Kush, a Soviet missile unit would fire a weapon. a complex amalgam of chemistry and engineering conceived in a closed city, and in doing so they would unknowingly cast a piece of their most guarded secret into the hands of an enemy, initiating a chain of events that would baffle their own scientists and alter the course of a hidden war. This convergence of high-tech espionage and low-tech warfare defines the unique angles of this story. Deep within the closed scientific city of Lyubertsy, outside Moscow, the scientists and engineers of NPO-Soyuz worked in an environment of enforced silence. Their mission was not merely to build weapons, but to master the material science that would make those weapons invincible. The Lepot program was the apex of this endeavour. It wasn't a single formula, but a generational leap in solid propellant technology. Western solid fuels, like those in the Minuteman, primarily used a polyurethane or polybutadiene binder, a rubbery matrix holding the powdered aluminum fuel and ammonium perchlorate oxidizer together. The Soviet breakthrough was in the binder's architecture. Lape incorporated specialized plasticizers and bonding agents that created a denser, more homogeneous grain. This allowed for a higher solids loading, more explosive punch in the same volume, while maintaining critical structural integrity during the violent stresses of burn. The result was a propellant that burned hotter, longer, and more predictably. For a missile designer, this translated into either greater range for the same size missile, or a smaller, lighter missile for the same range. For the Soviet military, it meant the dream of a mobile, survivable, heavy payload ICBM was moving from drawing board to foundry. The formula was a crown jewel protected by a classification level that made it a near physical extension of the state itself. Knowledge was compartmentalized. The chemists who worked on the binder knew little of the oxidizer specialists. Production batches were coded, traceable. The assumption of security was absolute. The technology was considered nekamim, untouchable. In Langley, Virginia, the hunt for Lapo was a puzzle assembled from shadows. The CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, DS&T, was home to men like John C. McQuiddy, a legendary figure who had pioneered the technical dissection of Soviet systems. His domain was a warehouse known informally as the bunker, filled with captured equipment. But chemical intelligence was different. You couldn't reassemble a molecule like you could a tank transmission. The analysts relied on national technical means, satellite imagery of test sites, telemetry intercepts from Soviet missile launches in the Pacific and seismic readings. A subtle change in a missile's plume signature, a fractional improvement in its burnout velocity, a reduction in the size of a new submarine's launch tubes, these were the faint signals. They pointed to a propulsion advance, but revealed nothing of its composition. Air Force, desperate for its own next-generation ICBM, the MX Peacekeeper, was pushing its contractors, Thiokol, Hercules, Aerojet, to make leaps in solid fuel energy. Progress was incremental, expensive. The nagging fear in the Pentagon was that Soviet chemistry had found a shortcut, a proprietary additive or process that bypassed years of American trial and error. This obsession created immense pressure stays on the CIA's clandestine service. Human intelligence, HUMINT, had to deliver what satellites could not, physical evidence. The DS&T drafted shopping lists of desired items with rocket propellant samples at the top. Case officers in the field, more accustomed to recruiting agents, now found themselves tasked with running operations that resembled high-stakes industrial procurement. The frustration built a culture of relentless focus. Every scrap from Afghanistan was scrutinized. A filter from a Soviet truck's air intake might contain trace elements of propellant dust from a nearby missile unit. The dirt on a salvaged uniform could be analyzed. It was a forensic war fought in laboratories, all aimed at reverse engineering a breakthrough conceived in a locked room half a world away. The stolen Sturm motor sample was the first tangible crack in the wall. It confirmed the advance was real, and it was in the field. Now they needed enough of it to steal the blueprint. The human drama of this technological theft, however, hinges on the unsuspecting intermediaries and the clinical precision of the engineers who would take their prize apart. In the Shah-e-Kot Valley, or on the slopes of the Savdko, the value of a rocket motor was measured in simple terms. Could it be used to kill Soviets? When the answer was no, its value plummeted, unless a facilitator from ISI whispered otherwise. The man in the shalwar kameez from the Hook scene embodies this critical nexus. He is a Pakistani intelligence officer, or a well-connected Afghan fixer, operating in the grey zone between the Mujahideen's tactical needs and the CIA's strategic desires. His job is logistics and translation, not of language but of context. He translates a burned-out piece of metal into a commodity. To the Mujahideen commander, he offers a trade, this useless tube for 5 new Belgian-made G3 rifles, or a crate of Chinese mortar rounds. The exchange makes sense in the economy of war. The commander gains immediate usable firepower. The facilitator gains the item for his invisible client. He has no need to understand the molecular secrets within. His expertise lies in trust, access, and deniability. He knows the routes, the commanders who control them, and the price of their loyalty. The system he operates within is brilliantly compartmentalized. The Mujahideen fighter who drags the motor from the wreckage knows only that his commander wants it. The commander knows only that the Pakistani intermediary pays well for such junk. The ISI handler knows the Americans covet it. The CIA case officer finally takes possession, seeing it not as junk, but as a potential Rosetta Stone. At each handoff, understanding terminates. This opacity is the operation's greatest security feature. The Soviets, if they ever traced the loss, would see only battlefield looters, not a targeted extraction by a foreign intelligence service. The Mujahideen became in effect the world's most unlikely and effective technical intelligence-gathering network, motivated by cash and weapons, completely unaware of the nuclear implications of their salvage. The rocket motor, once acquired, did not go to Langley. It entered a parallel, hyper-secure pipeline destined for a facility known by its cover name, the Foreign Materiel Center, FMC. Often colloquially called the Farm, though separate from the CIA's training facility, this was a secured compound, likely at a military base like the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground or a dedicated, anonymous warehouse complex. Here, the world's most advanced Soviet technology was methodically taken apart. The arrival of the Tochka motor, or a similarly significant system, would trigger a meticulously planned disassembly ritual. The team was a blend of CIA DS&T staff, Air Force propulsion engineers from the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory at Edwards Air Force Base, and cleared contractors from firms like Thiokol. They worked in climate-controlled cleanrooms, dressed in anti-contamination suits, not for their protection, but to prevent introducing foreign particulates that could corrupt the sample. The disassembly was forensic and non-destructive to the propellant itself. They would first perform extensive external photography and radiography, X-rays to map the internal grain geometry. Then, using precision tools, they would cut away the steel casing, revealing the solid, rubber-like propellant grain inside, cast in a complex star-shaped pattern to control burn rate. Core samples, only millimeters wide, would be drilled from specific locations, the center, the edge near the inhibitor liner. Each sample was immediately sealed in argon-filled vials. The real magic happened in the adjacent analytical laboratories. Here, the samples were subjected to a battery of tests. Differential scanning calorimetry, DSC, to measure the energy release and thermal properties. Gas chromatography mass spectrometry, GCMS, to vaporize a tiny speck and identify every organic compound in its fingerprint. Infrared spectroscopy to map molecular bonds. Ballistic evaluator tests to literally burn small strands under controlled conditions, measuring burn rate and pressure. Piece by piece, the Lepot formula was being reconstructed from its effects. The analysts weren't just stealing a recipe, they were reverse engineering the culinary technique from a single mouthful of the finished dish. They could identify the type of polybutadiene, the plasticizer, the antioxidant packages, and, most crucially, the mysterious bonding agents that gave the fuel its enhanced performance. This data was digitized, modeled, and formatted into a classified report that would soon land on the desks of weapons designers at the American solid fuel contractors. The Soviet advantage was being photocopied, one molecule at a time. This precise clinical theft set the stage for the operation's climax. Not a dramatic shootout, but a quiet, profound revelation in a laboratory that would send shockwaves through both superpowers. The specific operation to acquire a critical sample, codenamed SSALU-1, Soviet Solid Augmented Energy Sample 1, crystallized in early 1986. The CIA's desk in Islamabad, coordinating with its ISI liaison, had identified a promising lead. A Mujahideen faction affiliated with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's Hezb-e Islami had overrun a Soviet motor rifle regiment's temporary logistics point in Nangarhar province. Among the captured materiel was the remains of a 9M-79 Tochka tactical missile system. The launcher vehicle, A ZIL-135 truck had been destroyed by a mortar round, but the crew had abandoned it in haste. 2 of the missile's transporter erector launcher canisters were intact. This was the opportunity. The Tochka was a strategic priority target. The CIA's request was precise. They needed not just a fragment, but an entire rocket motor section, preferably from an unfired missile, or one with a dud ignition. The challenge was monumental. The site was deep in contested territory, subject to Soviet aerial reconnaissance and Spetsnaz patrols. Moving a multi-meter-long, several hundred-kilogram cylinder required planning. The ISI facilitator, using cash and promises of future arms shipments, orchestrated the operation. The Mujahideen unit first had to secure the area, then manually extract the massive tube from its damaged canister. Using block and tackle, they loaded it onto a modified Bedford truck, camouflaging it under a cargo of timber and sheep hides. The journey to the Pakistani border was a week-long ordeal of back roads and night travel, voiding Soviet aerial patrols and rival factions. The cargo was transferred 3 times, across 3 different Mujahideen groups, each paid a segment of the journey's fee. The ISI maintained a chain of custody through coded radio checks. Finally, at a pre-arranged safe house in the tribal areas near Miram Shah, the transfer to CIA control occurred, the moment depicted in The Hook. From there, the rocket motor entered a new phase of covert logistics, Air Force Base in the Middle East, likely Dhahran in Saudi Arabia or Incirlik in Turkey. At this transit point, it was transferred to a military transport aircraft, a C-141 Starlifter, for the final leg to the United States. Its destination, a secure hangar at Indian Head Naval Surface Warfare Center in Maryland, a premier facility for explosives and propellant research, chosen for its unparalleled expertise in energetic materials. Every step of this journey was a vulnerability. A curious Soviet spy satellite spotting unusual activity near the wreckage, a talkative Mujahideen fighter, a corrupt border guard, a catastrophic aircraft accident. But none of these interruptions occurred. The system of compartmentalization, bribery, and specialized transport worked. By late spring of 1986, a Soviet Tochka rocket motor, a product of the USSR's most advanced chemical engineering, lay on an examination stand in an American high-security facility, its secrets an ocean away from its creators. The physical acquisition was only half the battle. The true turning point awaited in the silent, sterile labs, where the Soviet secret would be forced to give up its ghost. The hangar at Indian Head was a cathedral of controlled tension. The Tochka motor, now designated SS-AEC-1, rested under brilliant halogen lights in a sealed dissection chamber. A team of perhaps a dozen individuals, CIA technical operations officers, Navy and Air Force propulsion experts, and a handful of cleared chemists from private industry, observed from behind a thick polycarbonate window. They were clothed in full anti-static, non-linting suits. The air was filtered, the humidity controlled. This was not merely a disassembly, it was an autopsy on a living secret. The process was led by a senior CIA engineer, a man whose entire career had been built anticipating this moment. His tools were not wrenches, but diamond-tipped coring drills, microsaws cooled by liquid nitrogen, and laser measuring devices. The first step was a comprehensive external scan. High-resolution photographs captured every weld, every Cyrillic stamp, every serial number. A portable X-ray unit was rolled in, producing ghostly images of the propellant grain's internal geometry, a complex multi-pointed star pattern designed to provide high initial thrust. Then came the breach. Using a precision circular saw, the team made a calculated cut several inches from the motor's aft end, just behind the nozzle assembly. The steel casing, a few centimeters thick, gave way with a shriek of metal, contained within a vacuum extraction hood to capture all particulates. As the section was lifted away, the propellant was exposed. It was a deep earthy brown, almost black, with a smooth, slightly waxy surface. It did not smell of chemicals, but had a faint, acrid odour. To the trained eye, its texture was immediately different from known Soviet stocks. Denser, more uniform, with no visible grain separation or pitting. Core samples, no wider than a pencil lead, were extracted from multiple depths and radial positions. Each was catalogued, sealed in inert gas vials, and hand-carried by security officers to the adjacent analytical suite. Here, the hidden architecture of Lepo began to materialize in data streams. in the chromatography lab, a minuscule sliver of propellant was vaporized. The resulting gas was separated into its component parts, and a mass spectrometer identified each molecule by its atomic weight. The readout scrolled across green screen monitors. The binder was confirmed as a carboxyl-terminated polybutadiene, a Soviet standard, but the plasticizer profile was anomalous. Researchers for its high energy and stability, but notoriously difficult to incorporate homogeneously. The Soviets had seemingly solved the incorporation problem. More startling was the oxidizer analysis. Alongside the expected ammonium perchlorate, spectrography revealed a significant percentage of ammonium dinitramide, ADN. This was a theoretical holy grail. ADN offered higher oxygen content than perchlorate, meaning more efficient combustion, and, critically, it produced nearly smokeless exhaust. A missile powered by ADN-rich fuel would have a drastically reduced launch signature, making detection by satellites or early warning systems more difficult. Research into ADN was in its infancy, plagued by instability issues. The Soviet sample showed it was not only stable, but expertly integrated. Finally, the bonding agent. Trace element analysis identified a rare earth catalyst, a lanthanide-based compound, acting as a cross-linking agent between the binder and the solid fillers. It created an exceptionally strong mechanical bond, allowing for a higher percentage of energetic solids to be packed into the matrix without cracking under thermal stress. This explained the high density and the impressive performance metrics. For the team at Indian Head, the emotion was one of profound professional respect mixed with sobering realization. The Soviets hadn't just caught up. In specific areas, they had surged ahead. Operational Fuels, a comprehensive top-secret report titled Technical Analysis of Soviet Advanced Solid Rocket Propellant, SSAE-1, was compiled. It contained not just findings but blueprints, chemical formulas, mixing ratios, curing profiles deduced from the grain's morphology. It was effectively a recipe. This report was hand-delivered to the Director of Central Intelligence, William J. Casey, and to a very select group within the Air Force's Space and Missile Systems Organization and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. The turning point was not an explosion on a battlefield, but a quiet consensus in a secure briefing room. The Soviet advantage was real, it was quantifiable, and it was now partially in American hands. The race was no longer about discovery. It was now about replication, adaptation, and closing a gap that had just been precisely measured. The acquisition and analysis complete, the operational focus shifted from espionage to application. The aftermath of this technological heist would reshape American missile design and baffle the very scientists who had created the prize. The SSAE-1 report did not simply gather dust in a vault. It became a foundational textbook for the American solid rocket propulsion community. Its distribution was ruthlessly compartmentalized under the no-foreign, no foreign nationals, and ORCON, originator-controlled classifications, but within that tight circle, it sparked a quiet revolution. The primary beneficiary was the US Air Force's MX Peacekeeper LGM-118A program. While the Peacekeeper's first-stage motor, built by Thiokol, was already in advanced development, the insights from the Soviet fuel had immediate impact on later stages and future upgrades. More directly, the report provided critical validation and direction for next-generation propellant research under the Air Force Rocket Propulsion Laboratory and DARPA's Advanced Strategic Missile Systems portfolio. American chemists now had a verified roadmap. They knew which theoretical paths the Soviets had successfully travelled. The discovery of ADN's operational use was a seismic shock. Researchers at the Naval Weapons Center at China Lake and contractors like Aerojet redoubled their efforts to solve ADN stability and crystallization issues with the knowledge that it was possible. The Soviet formula proved that a high ADN content propellant could be made stable enough for long-term storage in a missile silo. Navy's interest in low-signature propellants for submarine-launched missiles and the Air Force's quest for cleaner-burning ICBMs that would foul their silos less and be harder to track. The lanthanide bonding agent was another gift. It provided a specific chemical mechanism to study. Laboratories began experimenting with their own rare earth catalysts, leading to new families of high bond-strength composite propellants. The efficiency of the Soviet grain geometry, the star pattern, was modelled in American supercomputers, influencing the design of burn rate profiles for new motors. This was not a case of slavish copying. The Soviet formula was a starting point, a proof of concept. American engineers adapted its principles using domestic materials and manufacturing processes, often improving upon them. The windfall saved an incalculable amount of time and research dollars. Concurrently, the CIA and its partners continued the pipeline. SSAE-1 was followed by SSAE-2 and 3, samples from other systems, including propellant from the Soviet Sa-15 Gauntlet surface-to-air missile, which used a different variant of the advanced fuel. Each sample cross-verified the data and revealed nuances of application. The Afghan War, a bleeding wound for the USSR, had become a relentless technology siphon for its adversary. Every advanced missile fired risked its secrets being captured, analysed and turned against its creators. While American engineers worked with a new sense of direction, a deep and perplexing silence began to descend on the other side of the Iron Curtain, where the architects of Lapo were facing an inexplicable dilemma. In the sealed institutes of Lyubertsy and at the design bureaus of Votkinsk, where the Tochka missiles were manufactured, a subtle but profound dissonance began to emerge in the late 80s. It started with scattered, fragmentary reports from the 40th Army in Afghanistan. Technical intelligence officers filed routine loss reports for destroyed or captured equipment. These were concerning but not catastrophic. Weapons are lost in war. The dissonance turned to quiet alarm when, through technical intelligence and arms control verification channels, faint signals suggested the Americans were making peculiar progress. S-test launches of new strategic motors showed performance tweaks, subtle shifts into plume signatures that hinted at a deeper understanding of high-energy composite chemistry. At international propulsion conferences, Western papers began discussing bonding mechanisms and oxidizer combinations with a specificity that seemed informed. For the Soviet scientists who had crafted Lapo, the logic was implausible. Their security was absolute. The KGB's Third Directorate, responsible for military counterintelligence, had vetted every single person with access. The production facilities were isolated. The formula existed only in fragments, known in full only to a handful of senior academicians. Industrial espionage on this scale inside these citadels was considered impossible. The only other explanation was that the Americans had independently achieved a parallel breakthrough, a bitter pill, but a scientifically respectable one. Yet the nagging coincidence remained. The sudden American advances correlated precisely with the period of intense missile usage in Afghanistan. A paranoid hypothesis began to form among a small circle in the KGB's Scientific Intelligence Directorate, Directorate T, and the GRU. Could the Afghansy, the war, be the leak? The notion was almost insulting. It meant their crown jewel was being pawned by illiterate tribesmen for American dollars. Investigations were opened. Security around missile units in Afghanistan was tightened, but the evidence was circumstantial, lost in the fog of a disintegrating war, and a Soviet Union itself entering its death throes. They were baffled by a truth too operational and humiliating to fully grasp. Their most advanced technology was being stolen not by a brilliant spy, but by the chaotic aftermath of their own artillery strikes, retrieved by proxies and sold in a battlefield bazaar. The true aftermath of Operation SSAE was not a single new missile rolling out of a silo. It was the neutralization of a strategic surprise. S-planners had feared a mobile quick-launch successor to the SS-24 or SS-25 had not materialized as an overwhelming threat. Economic and political collapse played the dominant role, but the American intelligence coup had a significant effect. It removed the technological mystery and thus the worst-case scenario from Pentagon wargames. S entered the 90s with the Peacekeeper deployed, the Trident D5 submarine missile using advanced stable propellants entering service, and a profound understanding of the Soviet propulsion pinnacle, S-tactical missiles as well, from upgrades to the Army's Patriot system to new anti-tank weapons. The technological balance had been levelled, not on the open testing ranges, but in the hidden labs where one side's secrets were laid bare by the other. Furthermore, the operation validated a new brutal paradigm in technical intelligence gathering, proxy war exploitation. Afghanistan proved that a sustained conventional conflict against a superpower could be leveraged to systematically denude its technological arsenal. The CIA's success here would directly influence future approaches in other theatres, viewing conflicts not just as geopolitical struggles, but as open-air markets for the opponent's latest gear. The final grim irony was that the Soviet soldiers who fired those Tochka missiles in the Hindu Kush, believing they were pacifying a rebellious province, were in fact unknowingly conducting the final destructive live-fire test of a priceless secret, a test whose results were meticulously collected and analysed by their ultimate enemy. The battlefield was their proving ground, but the data belonged to the CIA. This clandestine struggle, fought with microscopes and mass spectrometers, left a legacy far beyond any single weapon system. The story of the stolen rocket fuel formula is a parable of the Cold War's hidden dimensions. It was a conflict waged not only with armies and ideologies, but with periodic tables and differential equations. The most consequential battles often occurred not at Checkpoint Charlie or in the skies over Mig Alley, but in the sterile silence of laboratories and the chaotic aftermath of mountain ambushes. The Soviet Union built a fortress of secrecy around its scientific achievements, believing security lay in isolation and compartmentalization. It was a logical defense against traditional espionage, but it failed to account for the anarchic, material reality of war. The conflict in Afghanistan acted as a relentless disassembler, prying loose the physical manifestations of those secrets, the tanks, the helicopters, the missiles themselves, and scattering them across a landscape where the rules of the closed city no longer applied. In this environment, the CIA's most effective agents were not fluent linguists or deep-cover moles, but cash, bartered weapons, and the simple, powerful incentive for a guerrilla fighter to turn debris into dollars. The Lepot operation underscores a timeless truth of military technology. A weapon's ultimate security depends not just on the integrity of its design bureau, but on the integrity of its entire operational life cycle, from factory to front line, and even to its destruction. The Soviets mastered the beginning of that cycle. They lost control of the end. For the United States, the heist was a masterpiece of indirect acquisition. It demonstrated that in an era of satellite surveillance and electronic interception, the humblest form of intelligence, the physical sample, could still yield the highest rewards. It turned the USSR's own war machine into an unwitting and incredibly prolific delivery service for its most sensitive secrets. Today, the physical remnants of that struggle are gone. The Toshka motors have been dissected, the reports declassified in part, the scientists retired. The propellant formulas themselves have been superseded. But the pattern it established remains. Modern conflicts continue to be harvesting grounds for technical intelligence, where every downed drone, every captured electronic system, every shattered piece of armor is scanned, not just for tactical data, but for the embedded secrets of a rival's industrial and scientific base. The bafflement of the Soviet scientists, then, speaks to more than a security failure. It speaks to the collision of two different realities, the controlled, theoretical world of the closed institute and the chaotic material world of a lost war. In that collision, the very essence of their achievement, a specific arrangement of atoms engineered for maximum destructive potential, ceased to be a secret. It became a commodity, traded in a dusty market, its value understood not in megatons or specific impulse, but in rifles and rocket grenades. In the end, the highest science of the superpower was reduced to the most basic transaction of the battlefield, and in that transaction, the balance of power quietly shifted.